All right. So let's go to screen share. Okay. So just a quick reminder that Flexibility Lab is due. Actually, I thought these both were going to be the 5th. So was there a reason that we changed it from the 5th to the 7th on there?
And just clicked on the wrong thing.
Yeah. Anyway, so these are listed here. So you've got your due dates. Since it's already there, I'll just leave it. But those assignments are due relative to flexibility. So, question? Oh. All right, so we're going to be starting on cardiovascular training today. And this is a really key one, as there we go. Okay, so cardiorespiratory training has changed significantly from what we used to sort of think about it. So this is an example of where research drives innovation, because it's clearly been one of those things where we used to say, okay, you know, you do some sort of aerobic exercise, you do it for X amount of time, you do it at a lower intensity, and that's what you do. And so that idea has been challenged by, and mainly that idea has been challenged based on time, right? So if you were to go through the CDC, World Health Organization, and all these other health organizations around what they advise for healthy individuals in terms of cardiovascular training, it's kind of all over the map. And some of them have weight loss as a guideline, or they have improved health outcomes, or they may have improved fitness, which are different, right? One is a little bit lower level, the health outcomes. So as we start to look at this, one of the things we see is that people oftentimes go, what, you want me to do something for an hour? I don't have that kind of time. And so that's driven a lot of the research to say, how do we shorten this up so that time is not an excuse for people? And so that we can look at how do we get efficient workouts that achieve the goals that we want and fit the time schedule of the clients that you're working with. Make sense? Right, it seems like time. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially nowadays. Since I started, it was always about, you know, okay, so today I do 25 minutes and next week I do 26 minutes and then I go 27 minutes and on and on and on. When is it up? You know, and I don't have all the time. So it was always, you know, all right, can you get 20 minutes? You know, so what you were referring to, like, all right, get your 20 minutes in, get your 30 minutes in, and that's it. And yeah, definitely, especially for individuals that, you know, that live in households where you have childcare, you have multiple jobs, you know, you have to care for your, you know, elderly, you know, you have all these other things, you know, that, you know, a lot of times takes priority. So yeah, I would go 100% agree with that.
You've also seen types of things now where break it up over the day, right? 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at the, you know, right? So in other words, you know, when someone says, you know, oh, I don't have 30 minutes. Well, you have 10 minutes, right? So we can try to do that. So the point of all this is that the training, how we train people in terms of improving cardiorespiratory endurance has really changed. And there's a lot more leeway. I mean, it used to be fairly rigid, and I would say now that it's much more, actually, it's much more interesting. I mean, you can be a lot more creative than just get on a treadmill and, you know, go till you drop sort of thing. So again, just a couple of reminders here. When we're talking about cardiorespiratory fitness, I think sometimes this is deceiving, where it's cardio, heart, respiratory, we think of lungs, but respiratory is really about using oxygen. So don't forget the tissues, right? So the issue is in the tissues. This is really looking at the capacity of our circulatory system and our respiratory system and our muscles to use oxygen. So it's all about getting oxygen from the environment into the lungs, out to the bloodstream, over to the muscles, muscles use it. So all of those combine to form that system. If I were to ask you, how do we measure this? Anybody remember the term that we use for cardiorespiratory endurance? What's the scientific term that we use? Go ahead, Anton. Yeah. Remember, so we talked about oxygen consumption, right? Our ability to consume oxygen, and the term is VO2 max. Remember that one? Stands for volume, V, O2, oxygen, max. Well, what's the maximum? So it's VO2 max. VO2 max. So that's really what we're talking about here, and it's critically important to health and wellness. We all need a basic level of oxygen consumption to do our daily thing. Anything above that is better. So you're going to see this range of oxygen consumption, which we looked at previously. On the one hand, right, you've got a cardiac rehab patient. This person might be at a score of, say, 14. And up here, you've got, you know, an Olympic cross-country skier, IER, I think.
Yes.
God, doesn't that look weird?
It does.
You know, I'm looking at it going, and, you know, they might be up in the 80s. So we measure this, as we talked about before, in milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. So milliliter is a unit, right? Just think of it as a unit of something, in this case, a unit of oxygen. Kilogram, anybody remember how many pounds is a kilogram? Yeah, 2.2, right? 2.2 pounds is a kilogram, right? So that's 2.2 pounds. And a minute, right? 60 seconds. So it's basically how many units of oxygen can 2.2 pounds of your body use in 60 seconds. That make sense? Any idea why we use this 2.2 pounds? Why don't we just use your total body weight? Any thoughts on that? Why don't we just use somebody's total body weight? So if I wanted to compare who's more physically fit in this room, and I just use total body weight instead of 2.2 pounds, any idea, would that be a good thing, or would anybody have an advantage?
Yes. Well, if somebody's bigger than you, if they have an advantage if you don't have the body weight.
Yeah.
Versus the baseline.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly right. So let's say I wanted to compare an elephant and a mouse, and I wanted to compare their oxygen consumption. If I just compared them based on their total body, right, the elephant would crush the mouse, right? In other words, because the elephant is big, lots of tissue, lots of oxygen needed. The mouse, tiny. Although, you know, you've seen some mice, they're pretty darn big, right? So this just allows us to take size out of the equation. And now we measure everybody on the same unit, 2.2 pounds. Make sense? So that way, yeah, I can compare Shaquille O'Neal to
Simone Biles.
Simone Biles, thank you. Right? I'd love to see those two standing next to each other.
There is actually
Is there a picture? of
yeah,
that?
there's a picture.
Oh, we'll have to look it up. How many Simone Biles does it take to equal a Shaquille O'Neal? Yeah, we'll have to find that one. So really important. And so when we look at this, remember, we're talking about this combined system, right? We get oxygen in from the environment into the lungs, kick it out, right? So the left side of the heart kicks the oxygenated blood out to the body. The right side of the heart collects the deoxygenated blood, kicks it into the lungs, and we get that system going. So the more that system can operate, right, the more oxygen it can crank through and your tissues can use per minute of time, fantastic. Right, so we breathe in oxygen-rich blood, right, that gets out to the exercising muscles. They use that to produce energy, right? They produce ATP. We use oxygen. We expire, thank you, CO2, right? And so CO2 is a byproduct of metabolism, right? So we blow off CO2, we inhale oxygen, and the more that system can function, right? The more oxygen in that same 60-second period of time for every 2.2 pounds, the more physically fit you are. So one of the reasons that we care so much about cardiorespiratory endurance is because the lack of cardiorespiratory endurance is the #1 predictor of premature death. Low cardiorespiratory endurance. So the person that has a lower VO2, by the way, 14, this was my dad. So my father, when he was 65, retired and he had emphysema his whole life. He retires, and about 3 months later, he's going to come down to visit with my mother. And I talked to him on the phone the night before, and he sounds terrible. You can just hear the congestion in his lungs. I mean, so as he was talking and he was breathing, I could hear like gurgling. I said, Dad, you sound terrible. He said, oh, I'm just having an asthma attack, you know. Anyway, so the next morning I get a call from my sister. Hey, by the way, they're not coming down. Dad's in a coronary unit, right? He was not able to breathe. He took himself to the emergency room and they diagnosed him with congestive heart failure. So they do a treadmill test. Put him on a treadmill, face mask, the whole thing. They measure his oxygen consumption, and it was 14 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. That is slightly above being able to be independent. Get up, dress yourself, feed yourself. He was in a terribly diminished state. I say to the physician, you know, I hear there's a really good cardiac rehab program in the basement of this hospital. He says, oh yeah. I said, how can we get him into that program? Oh, that's a good idea. So he trains under the supervision of a cardiac care nurse, an exercise physiologist, and they get his VO2 up to 44 in about 3 months. So he went from being barely able to dress himself to being actually pretty fit in about a 3-month period of time. So this is really adaptable, right? If you train, it improves. But one of the things we found with COVID is that a lot of folks that had comorbidities, right? In other words, they had smoker, overweight, hypertension, diabetes. If they had other illnesses and low cardiorespiratory, much higher rate of death, much higher. Does that make sense? So basically, when I work with people, this is of primary concern to me because this is all about longevity, right? So I want people to have stronger muscles. I want them to, be, less weight if fat loss is a priority. But ultimately, and almost no one comes in and says to you as the personal trainer, I would like to increase my VO2 max. What might they say to you as a goal that might give you a clue that that would be important? Any thoughts on that one? How might a client talk to you about what are the kinds of things you think that they say that would trigger you to think, we got to work on this. Any thoughts? You're on a roll, Anton. Go ahead.
I would say that they will probably go like, yeah, I want to get more physically fit
Uh-huh.
and like leave out the weight stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so they might say, I want to be more physically fit, or I want to get in shape, or I want to have more energy. I want to have more stamina. I want to be able to play with my kids and not feel like I have to call 911. Right? I want to walk up the stairs and not have to, I mean, literally, I tease about this, but it's true. My office sits in a place where I can watch people walk up the stairs. Early in the semester, every single semester, I see people walk up the stairs, they get to the first landing. They can't go up another flight of stairs, or they get to the top of the stairs and you can just see them, you know, like trying to catch their breath. It's a fairly short slide of stairs, but what does that tell me? This is really low. By the middle of the semester, I can see the same person, and I wouldn't say they're skipping up the stairs, but they're definitely going at a faster pace, and they're not doing this. You know, when people go, oh my God, this campus, it's so hilly, I think, yes, outdoor stairmaster. Right? It's a way to improve our fitness. When I was coaching, and I would take students on a tour, I would go over to the library. You know that hill that goes from the parking lot up to the library? I would go on, it's about a 7% grade. And so I would go to that hill and I would walk up it with them. And I wanted to see, do they go up it quickly, slowly? Are they panting? It was my own little fitness test to see how physically fit was that student in the off season. It would tell me a little bit about their training. Okay. So we're not going to go through all this, but I did want to just show you, this is a basic example of, and you've seen up in our lab, we have a setup like this to be able to actually measure oxygen consumption. So the way that we measure it is you can put somebody on a treadmill or you can put somebody on a bike, but to actually measure it, you must have a face mask on. And in this case, what happens is the face mask, you can see that the nose is plugged. So all the air comes in and out of their mouth. There's a valve here that they breathe in the air. It goes into their body. They exhale the CO2. That comes down here and it goes into this analyzer. And this analyzer can tell us how much oxygen they are exhaling and how much CO2 they're exhaling. We throw it all in an equation and we can get what their VO2 is. What usually happens on these tests is that the bike gets harder and harder and harder to pedal. So we usually go in 3-minute work stages, same cadence, usually 50 to 60 RPM, pedal, 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 pedal. Resistance gets harder. They have to keep the pace up, just like you did when you were doing the step test. Right? Step test is a way to predict this. It's a lot easier test. Anybody ever had a max VO2 test done? Yeah, these are tough. I mean, usually, yeah. What we do is we keep going and keep going and keep going. Diego, can you go another minute? Thumbs up, yes, because they can't talk, right? They got a mask thing in. Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down, no. I'm not so sure. So we keep going until they can't either keep the pace or they say, stop. And then we measure. Yeah, or you fall off the treadmill or something. So
we did that. We did this test at in Northridge, at Cal State Northridge. I was one of the subjects, and there was 3 people, 2 on each side, 1 behind, in the last stage to catch me in the event, because we really wanted to, you know, go to failure, right? And they just stopped me. They didn't catch me, so I felt better, but it burns, very uncomfortable. You're breathing because everything's coming through your throat, so your throat feels extremely dry, you know, because you're not able, you have that apparatus in your mouth, so you're not able to generate enough saliva, and your muscles burn. They burn, yeah, especially when each stage with each stage, obviously towards the end of that stage, when, can you go another stage? Yes, no. I was just going, but it's pretty cool. If you ever get a chance to do it, if you guys, any of you guys want to go on to the next stages in your educational path, and they ask you to do it, please volunteer, because you don't get a lot of chances to be the subject and or experiences. And it's pretty cool to know, what a person goes through, what it feels like.
Yep.
And you learn so much about your body and how much you can or cannot push yourself. And then you can, that's a nice experience for you to be able to, as whether it be you be doing training, or personal training, occupational therapist, physical therapist, athletic trainer, all these career paths. So, yeah.
Do you remember your numbers?
Shoot, I want to say 67. I would have to go. I believe I still have my notebook. I think it was a 67. Yeah, that's for a non-competitive athlete. I mean, I was back in that day, I was probably doing about 250 miles of biking a week and about 40 to 50 miles of running per week. So I was pretty good condition for cardiovascular wise. So yeah, I think it was 67.
Yeah, I want to say, when I did mine, of course, this was how long ago, I think it was, I want to say maybe 48, 49, somewhere in there. I think I was below 50. I think it was right in there. But one thing about this is, and Diego brings up a good point, cycling is very different than running. And so there are lots of different protocols that we can use. A lot of them are treadmill, where the treadmill starts flat and every 3 minutes it goes up and up and up and up and up. And it has big chunks of grade in it, right? So you might increase by like 3% the grade. Then there are other ones that get faster and faster. Usually they get you to a running speed and then they start increasing the grade. I've only seen, in all the years I've done these, I've only seen one person beat the treadmill. And that was a triathlon participant way back when triathlon was just getting started as a thing. Anyway, we had him on a treadmill that we had it at its highest grade and the fastest speed it would go. And he kept going. So it was like, well, okay, we're done, because we got the thing was screeching and wailing. Anyway, so that was that. But yeah, this is it's not a particularly comfortable test because you're going all out. I mean, and to the place where you cannot go, you can't take another pedal or another step on that treadmill. So what we do is we measure it, and we measure it in typically in milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. So this is a lot of technology. What you guys did was you did the step test to predict where you would be if we put you on a treadmill or a bike and ran you till you dropped. The Rockport test, which is the 1 mile walk or the 1.5 mile run, those are other tests that do the same thing. They predict what would this number be if we ran you till you're dropped. But they're not nearly as hard, which means they're also safer. So for example, if this person was somebody that had maybe illness or disease, we'd probably have to have a physician there. And then that jacks the cost up a lot. Yeah. So anyway, so that's how we do it. We do either treadmill or that. I'm not going to go through all of these things. Your book does a nice job of that, but looking at all of the basically improvements in health, Immediate impacts of cardiorespiratory exercise, long-term impact here. I think the thing that I want to focus on here is basically when you train somebody, you know, their heart's going to get stronger, their lungs are going to be more efficient, but the real increases in oxygen consumption, where the real adaptation occurs, is right here. Increased number and size of the mitochondria. We store more glucose. We have a better ability to use lactic acid and fuel and fats as fuel. This is really the keeper here. This is where it all is. Again, the issue is in the tissues. Your body builds more infrastructure, more capillaries, more mitochondria, more red blood cells. Basically, your body gets better at building the entire system out to be able to process more oxygen. And those are powerful adaptations in terms of increasing that. Okay. So that's the background on all that. We know it's good. We know we want to do it. We want our clients to be have higher VO2. How do we get them there? Right. So your client says to you, I want to get in better shape. Or your client says to you, I want more stamina. Or your client says to you, I need more energy. I'm so exhausted all the time. Right. So we use a program, Fit VP. FITTE. The E is silent. In my world, this is the most important thing, is the enjoyment. I'd actually put it at the front, but then it spells EFIT, and that sounds like a bird in a swamp, right? So the E is silent, but we know it's the most important, right? Because remember when we talked about psychology of exercise, people don't persist in things they don't like. If you like it, if it's fun, if it's enjoyable, if it feeds your soul, you'll do it. Right? If you value it, you'll do it. So you may have heard just fit, but we also want to include these things, volume and progression. Diego mentioned progression a little bit earlier, so he was talking about increasing number of minutes. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works here. So this is the crux of it. You got to make sure you understand this, and you got to make sure you know this. FITTE VP. So this formula provides the guideline for establishing how often you're going to have somebody exercise, at what intensity, for how long, what exercise are you going to have them do? Hopefully something they enjoy. Over time, you're going to add volume and you're going to add progression. But basically, think about this like a prescription. Anybody ever go to the doctor and the doctor gives you some kind of medication to take? Right? That medication? What's on the bottle of medication? What does the doctor tell you when they say, take this drug? Right. So is it 10 milligrams? Is it 40 milligrams? Is it 150 milligrams? Right. So what amount is in the pill itself? Right. And then there's also the dosage. Is that what you're probably referring to, Javi? So yeah. So you get instructions, right? Take this drug in the morning, 3 times a week. You know, blah, blah, blah. Right. So the prescription, they give you a prescription for taking that intervention. Does that make sense? Right. So the medication is an intervention, right? We're intervening with whatever system, you know, malfunction you have. So that's what this is, right? We're going to intervene to improve somebody's oxygen consumption. And here's our prescription. Right. So this is like thinking, you know, we've heard the term exercise as medicine. Exercise is medicine. Here's your prescription. Right? There's your prescription. So you're going to be just like the doctor prescribing. Right? It's always so interesting to me because whenever I talk to physicians, when you go to the doctor, what's the doctor tell you? You should exercise more. Well, they probably don't say that to you guys because you're exercisers, right? But for a lot of clients, they're going to say, you know, you should really exercise more. Well, that's helpful. You mean like this? You know, so they don't give them this level of specificity. So the client walks out of there going, yeah, the doc says I gotta exercise more. I don't know what that means. Right? I don't really know what to do. Okay. So basically frequency, right? How many times you're going to train that person in a given time frame? We typically talk about a week's period of time. Right? So how many times per week? What level of intensity? How hard should that exercise be? This is really the big one. Intensity is really the key because intensity is going to determine frequency and time. So intensity is really the key. How long should they engage in it? Should it be an hour on the treadmill? Can it be 30 minutes? Can it be 10 minutes? Right? How long am I going to have that person doing whatever the activity is that we want them to do? The type of exercise, this has changed so much. Used to be, you know, you had to swim or something that were these repetitive motions. And now we do things like kickboxing. Or now we do things like interval training or HIIT training. Or we might do something that are body weight exercises. Anybody ever heard of the 7-minute workout? Right, 7-minute workout. Basically, it's 7 minutes. You change every 30 seconds. So you might start with squats, and then you go to jumping jacks, and then you go to push-ups, and then so in other words, there's lots of ways I can get my heart rate up. So what's the key? Really doesn't make any difference what you do, as long as you can get your heart rate up to its training zone, right? Up to the level of intensity that you're going to prescribe for that person. Again, enjoyment, is it fun? How much time each week is the volume? And progression is how do we incrementally increase the load, the total volume? Right, so if all I did was the same workout all the time, my body is going to adapt. And if I never change the workout, will it fail to adapt or continue to adapt? And usually we want to switch things up. We want to provide more load. So if I do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, my body will adapt to that level of activity. So we want to make sure we can provide a variety of activities with that. So does that make sense? So that's our big overall template that we use. So let's start talking about these individual factors here. And Diego, just jump in here whenever you want to here. So frequency. Here's what the research says. If I want to produce results, and in this case, the result that I want is to increase the oxygen consumption, right? Well, with me on that? That's what we're training. I want to increase the oxygen consumption. What the research says is, if I'm doing more moderate intensity activity, right? So my heart rate gets up, but it doesn't go sky high, right? In other words, my heart rate might go from, say, a resting heart rate of 70 up to, say, 130, right? My maximum might be 200, so I'm far from maximum. So I'm not sitting at a desk, but I'm not sprinting either, right? It's somewhere kind of in the middle on there. So about 150 minutes per week, so that's about 2.5 hours. Right, so the total volume, 2.5 hours per week. I can split that up a lot of different ways. If I work at higher intensities, less time. So with a lot of clients that are particularly pressed for time, we often increase the intensity if they can tolerate it. Right? And if we increase the intensity, the research says you don't have to go as long to get the same benefits. So again, this is where we start to play. This is where the art comes in. Who's my client? How much time do they want to spend? How much time can they spend? So basically, we're talking about 3 to 5 days per week, and ideally combining moderate and vigorous activity in various combinations that get us, into this realm. So essentially 3 to 5 days per week. So if your client says, well, how often do I have to exercise? Ideally, we want a minimum of 3, could go up to 5. Let's see what your schedule allows. Yeah, go ahead, Diego.
And so here is where there's plenty of times where you as a trainer, you're probably gonna be spending some of that time during your training session. We tend to go with resistance training, right? Like we want to get them working out, lifting weights and stuff. However, this is where you can incorporate your cardio training into your session. I had clients that I would that's literally what we did. We did their cardio when they would come in, and that's what they would pay me for, cardio and flexibility, and then they would go do their own strength training on their own, okay? Because this is the part that they have the most trouble with, okay? And then so eventually, when I would be able to get them to get better at being able to do more vigorous intensity, then I can go ahead and incorporate the cardio into the strength training or into the entire session. So then we can combine both or everything that we wanted to do. So yeah, this is something where you might be the one that needs to be there present in order for them. Because as I know, as we go into the presentation, there are times where a person does not know how to measure their heart rate. They don't know what intensity they should be at, or how to measure it. Their RPE, our ratings of perceived exertion. Okay, they don't know that stuff, so they might need a little more guidance from you. And that is a great tool to utilize to be able to teach and coach those individuals to get more comfortable with doing cardiovascular training. Well, I don't know how to take my heart rate, while I'm running, where I should be at, right? So this is a great place where you can incorporate it into your sessions, maybe initially, and then as you progress, and you can take a step back and let them do it on their own.
Yeah, so frequency is that first part of it. So what I want you to be thinking about as we're going through this FITTE-VP, remember that's a formula. So it's just like those checkpoints. If I'm looking at postural checkpoints, again, it's not just I have this kind of global view. I mean, I want to have a global view, but I also want to have, what are my checkpoints, right? So again, we always get away from willy-nilly to what's the evidence say? What do I need to do from a scientific point of view? So again, intensity is the key. Lots of ways that we can look at intensity, and there's lots of ways, depending on your client, of how we can assign the appropriate intensity. This is where you can really hurt somebody, is if you assign an inappropriate intensity. You give them too much, and particularly if they are a person that has comorbidities. So this is a person with heart disease, a smoker, a person with hypertension, right? All of a sudden you say, and this is why people, unfortunately, die during exercise. People do too much, right? They're excited. I want to get going, and all of a sudden I haven't exercised in 40 years. No problem. I'll go sprint. And, they suffer heart attacks. So the goal is, again, do no harm. Okay, so I want to give you kind of where this comes from, and then we're going to break it down. So here's the real nitty-gritty of the science. If you take a look at these graphs down here, so this one is VO2. So here we're looking at oxygen consumption. So here's the person on the treadmill or on the bike. It gets harder and harder and harder and harder on the bike. Make sense? We keep increasing the grade. When we measure what's going on, we're going to see that their oxygen consumption goes up and up and up. And it's going to get to a point where it's going to flatten out. We could add more load. They cannot extract more oxygen and use it. They're done. I mean, they're toast, right? They are finished. That's when they jump off the treadmill or they say, stop. I can't do anymore. So you can see that their VO2 goes from somewhere, below 20 to just above 20 to 25 to 30. And if they kept going, like Diego said, his was 67. Ooh, right? That was probably a long test.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah, at 3-minute work stages, that's going to be a long test. So you can also see how this is kind of linear. Is that making sense to you? Right? As the intensity gets harder, so does the oxygen consumption goes up, and it's almost 1 for 1. Look at heart rate. Heart rate parallels this line. Does that make sense? So when we measure heart rate and VO2 at the same time, because they're so closely linked in terms of my VO2 cannot go up unless my heart rate does. It just can't, right? The heart has to pump the blood. So researchers got really smart and they figured out that, what's the research say? The research says that if I want to increase somebody's oxygen consumption, right? I want to increase their VO2 max. What the research says is you got to exercise somewhere between 50 and 85% of your oxygen consumption. This is going to get a little confusing, and then we'll make it really easy. So Diego said, we'll do a little math here. So Diego, you said your VO2 was 67, right?
Yeah.
Woo, baby. Okay, so what's 50% of this? Yeah, so 33.5. And somebody want to do some quick math? What is 90% of, what's 85% of 67? So it's going to be 67 times 0.85.
56.9.
56.9. So I'm Diego's personal trainer. Diego says, 67 is really good, but you know what? I want to get it up. I want to see what's my ceiling. Right, I'm 67 now, but maybe I could get it up to 80. Make sense? So now I'm going to say to Diego, okay, here's what the research says. If we want to increase your VO2 from 67 to say 80, you got to train 3 to 5 days per week at a VO2 intensity, right? Because the research shows if I want to increase my oxygen consumption, I got to train at 50 to 85% of my VO2 max. So I tell Diego, you're going to have to train between 33.5 and 56.9 mils per kg per minute. Okay, ready? Are you okay? Can you do that? And he's probably going to look at me and go, what are you, like, nuts? I don't know how to measure that. Right? I don't have all the gear to do it, and I'm certainly not going to go invest 30 grand in, I'm not doing that. So here's what the research says. Because these two lines parallel each other, we can substitute heart rate for this goofiness. Because 60% of your maximum heart rate for like the vast majority of the population corresponds to 50% VO2. 90% of your maximum heart rate corresponds to 85%. So I can eliminate this and I can prescribe a heart rate for him to train at. And it'll get me to the same place. Yeah, maybe good.
What's an example of someone whose heart rate and VO2 max wouldn't be really similar?
If you had somebody that was perhaps, cardiac rehab patient, in which case the heart rate might be extremely high and the VO2 very low. So in disease states, you might see that. But for a person where that system is functioning correctly, they always parallel. They always parallel. So does that make sense? The research tells us I got to exercise at 50 to 85% of VO2, but that's impractical. So we use heart rate as our guideline because it's easy. Everybody on the planet already has a built-in heart rate monitor. It's called 2 fingers and a pulse. Right? We don't need all the electronics. They're convenient, but 2 fingers and a pulse. So I want you to just understand that's where the research comes from. That's where the data comes from. Because what we're going to do then is now show you how to train or how to calculate those heart rates using our range of 60 to 90%. So I wanted you to understand where 60 to 90% comes from. It's not just yanked out of the thin air. Right? Everything is always based on research. So this is what I like to call Goldilocks and the 3 bears. You remember the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears? Right? Goldilocks breaks into the house. She's hungry, so she has some porridge. One was too cold, one was too hot, one was just right. Right? She's exhausted after the break-in. Right? So now she needs to take a nap. One bed was too hard, one was too soft, one was just right. And I can't remember what happened at the end of the story. What did the bears come home and like what they did?
They found her sleeping in the
Oh, they found it, and then the
baby bear.
oh, the baby bear. So did they? What did they call the police? What did they do?
And I think he's or she ran.
You know, some of those children's stories, those Aesop's fables and all that. You know, like where they boil the kids in the water. I mean, some of those are gruesome. Anyway, all right. So Goldilocks and the 3 bears, right? So here's what the data says. If I exercise less than 3 to 5 days per week, remember our FIT formula, FITTE VP, it's not bad if I exercise less than 3 days per week. It's just that any of those wonderful benefits, I won't get as much of. It's not bad if I exercise more than 6 to 7 days per week. And if you can do more than 7, you're living on a different planet. In this case, you can see the curve flattens out. There's no additional benefit, even though I have an additional session. This is where people get injured, right? This is where people get overtrained. But you can see that the curve has this really steep slope to it, and that's our just right range. So this is where we can get the most benefit, right? It's effective for people and provides safety. We're not going to hurt it. Make sense? So we're always looking for that just right range, and research tells us what that just right range is. So we can play with all these variables. Remember we talked about acute variables? We can play with all these variables to get our exercise prescription. So frequency tells us 3 to 5 days per week. Here's our intensity. Remember we said 60 to 90% of maximum heart rate. Time is going to be somewhere between 50, the research says 15 and 60 minutes, but here's the key, at your training heart rate. So what you're going to notice here is that training heart rate is a big deal, right? Heart rate is our guideline. We're training oxygen consumption, but we're going to use heart rate as the feedback so that my client knows, hey, I got to pick up the pace. Oh, I'm going too hard, right? We want to give them a range. I'm not a big fan of target heart rate, one number. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm a fan of range. Right? So people have, they can, let's face it. Are some days better than others?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is why they make beer commercials out of it, right? Some days are better than others. Some days you feel great. Some days it feels terrible. Right? So, that range it gives us something to work in. Okay, so lots of different methods. VO2, this is great. We just talked about that, but it's often really impractical. So we're going to focus on these two and maybe a third. We're going to focus on the Tanaka method, and we're going to focus on the Carbonine method of determining that. So remember, we're still talking about intensity. These are all the formulas. I'm going to walk you through them. Okay. So here's the Tanaka method. So the Tanaka method, you guys have probably all heard of 220 minus age, right? 220 minus age to get to your maximum heart rate. That is an okay formula. It's not as precise as it could be. So more research. And what we've come up with is a little bit better formula for that. So the Tanaka formula is this. If I want to predict maximum heart rate, why do I need to know maximum heart rate? Because I'm going to have to figure out what 60 to 90% of it is. If I don't know what the maximum heart rate is, I can't prescribe the right intensity. Make sense? I got to know the max. So that's our starting point. So the Tanaka method basically says, you're going to take the number 208. Where'd they get that number? Research. So 208, you're going to subtract out 70% of your age. So in other words, 0.7 times your age. So why don't you go ahead and calculate that right now for yourselves. Take your age, multiply it by 0.7, whatever number you get, subtract it from 208.
This is where all that math, all those math classes you took throughout the years come in handy.
Yeah. So I'm going to take 0.7, multiply it by my age, subtract it from 208. Okay. Anybody in here 18 years of age? How about 19? Okay, what'd you get, Diego?
I'm gonna do it right now.
Okay.
208 times 0.7.
Of your age.
Any 20-year-olds?
194.
Okay, so 194. All right, what 20-year-olds, what did you guys get?
I go out by negative 194.
Hope it's not negative.
One negative.
No.
So you multiply 0.7.
So you're going to take your age, 20 times 0.7, 194, okay?
Minus 2.
Yeah, minus 208. I think you just subtracted it, 208.
2.
So 20-year-olds were 194. Anybody 21? What'd you get? 190, 193. If you get a fraction, anybody get a fraction? Right, if you got a fraction, we always round right to the nearest whole number. Yeah, we always round to the nearest whole number because nobody's that good. Nobody can. Oh, that was a third of a beat. I got it. Okay, so is that making sense? Now you have your maximum heart rate. So in the Tanaka method, we're going to take, so in this case, here's a 40-year-old. The 40-year-old, right, 0.7 times 40, that number equals 28. 208 minus 28 equals 180. Maximum heart rate of 180 for this 40-year-old person. So what Tanaka said then was, okay, if I know that it's 180 beats per minute, then I'm going to multiply that by 0.60, because remember, that's our training range, right? Remember that? Right, so I'm going to take that 0.60 and 0.90. So if I take 180 times 0.60, that gives me 108 beats per minute. 180 times 0.90, that gives me 162. So for this client, their training heart rate range would be 108 to 162. So when I go to that client, I say, okay, Diego, we want you exercising 3 to 5 days per week at a heart rate of 108 to 162. Right? If it's below 108, we want you to pick it up a little bit. If it's above 162, we want you to slow down a little bit. And we want you to keep that heart rate for about somewhere between 15 and 60 minutes. Right? And then you start to plan, you know, is it going to be 20 minutes? Is it going to be 21 minutes? What's it going to be? That makes sense? You all with me on that? Does anybody see a problem with this? A problem with this method?
I would say it leaves out body composition. Like if you're on like overweight or obese.
Okay, you're onto something. It's not quite body composition, but Anton's onto something. This does not individualize. This is the same for every 40-year-old. Person who's the 40-year-old that's here versus the person that's the 40-year-old up here. This does not take into account anything about an individual. So if you go into a gym, right, you go into a health club, you ever notice how they always have the sign up there? There's always the graph that tells you what your training heart rate is based on your age. Anybody ever seen that? They have been all of them. It's probably hidden away somewhere. But there's always the graph. It's based on this. Graph doesn't care who you are. If you're 40, that's your number. So Carbonine said, we can do better than that. We can individualize for people. So this is the formula that we really use. This is one you're going to want to commit to memory because it really works great. So this is called the Carbonine method. And it's called the Carbonine method because that was the name of the researcher. So we still start with the Tanaka. 208 minus 0.7 times your age. We still get the same heart rate max. So we're all the same up to this point. Okay. So then what Carbonine said was, maximum heart rate is age dependent. Resting heart rate tells us a lot about the level of fitness a client has. Remember when we took your resting heart rate, like, 3 years ago when we started this class? Right, so we took your resting heart rate, and for many of you, it was below 60. Bradycardia. You have really good cardiovascular endurance, and it shows in your heart rate. Some of your resting heart rate was much higher. So our resting heart rate, this is where we get the individual in this prescription. So Carbonine, pretty smart person, said, let's take a look at this thing. Here's our what we have to play with. The maximum is the ceiling. The resting heart rate is the floor. Your resting heart rate's never going to zero. Well, I mean, it does, but that's once. Right? But as a living human being, that resting heart rate provides that floor. So this is our play. This is what we have to play with. This is how many beats we can play with in terms of assigning that. We still use the same conditioning intensity, 60 to 90%. So what Carbonine said was, let's use this thing called heart rate reserve. So what Carbonine says was, we'll take the maximum, we'll subtract out the minimum. That's going to give us a number of beats. So here's an example. Here's a person, same 40-year-old person in the previous example. Their resting heart rate is 70 beats per minute. So I'm going to take the maximum heart rate. Sorry, I'm going to take 208 minus 0.7 to get their age, 180. So I know that their maximum heart rate is, sorry, this should be 180. All right. My math is correct down here, but I screwed this up here. So this is really 180, right? Well, agree with me? Yep, you got it. Okay, so my mistake here. So now I'm going to take this 180 and I'm going to subtract out 70, right? I'm going to take the maximum minus the resting. So if I do that, it's 110 beats per minute. I take 110 beats per minute, multiply it by 0.60, right? 60 to 90%. I get 66. I add the resting heart rate back in because it's not going away. I got to put it back into the equation. That gives me a training heart rate of 136. I do the same thing again, plus 70, I get 169. So now for this client, instead of saying exercise at 108 to 162, it's exercise at 136 to 169. Same age. Now I know their heart rate. So in other words, it increases that lower end. 108 is pretty low. For a lot of people, 108 is 2 cups of coffee, right? No exercise needed. You know, just get that espresso in there and that heart rate's up. That makes sense?
Mhm.
So we're not going to worry about the math today because we're going to do that on Thursday. So Thursday, what we're going to do is we're going to give you some scenarios. You're going to work in some groups on Thursday. We're going to give you some scenarios and you're going to work out these details yourself, right? You're going to work in groups and you're going to develop some exercise prescriptions using this formula. Yeah, go ahead.
What I would strongly recommend for you guys, and it has been my experience and what I've observed out on the field is that a lot of trainers, personal trainers, don't know how to prescribe fitness, cardiovascular endurance training, and this is the reason why, because they don't know what intensity. Because what 8 miles an hour on the treadmill, is for you completely different than Anton, right? And what a spinning class is for you is very different than for Ellen. And so individuals don't know, if their life is dependent on working and their lifestyle, they don't have time to do this stuff, to do this equations. So it is your responsibility as a trainer to really know this, right? And then practice it, put it to practice. Okay, that's the best way you can actually learn this. Okay, this is tangible stuff that you can do on your own. So when you are, you get to your first client, it's not like, oh my God, remember that? No, it's like, okay, yeah, I remember this. Therefore, let me take out my notes and prescribe it. This is literally prescription. This is it. I mean, when it comes to fitness, cardiovascular, respiratory, this is it, okay? Because you can deal with the frequency, right? But the intensity, like Ellen mentioned earlier, that is what determines, okay? We just saw 108, very low. But now you have somebody that is more specific towards that individual's fitness, or active lifestyle or inactive lifestyle. So that's gonna change it up a little bit, okay? And they're at the high end on their training. Okay, so I would strongly recommend you guys to get to know this, do it on yourselves. When you go out to do your cardio, how many times have you guys gone out to on a run or on a bike ride and you just go? And have you guys ever checked your heart rate?
How many of you actually use heart rate as a guide when you exercise?
1, 2.
Yeah, it is the key to training.
Yep.
Absolutely, the key
Yeah.
to training,
And I think that
effectively.
effectively and safely as well. And I think it has gotten overlooked for so many years and so much time. And I see it over and over and over again. And people are, when they come into the fitness center and they're running and they're just pushing on that more. And they stop, they have to go on the side of the rails and hold on. And then they just try to keep going. Why? Because you try to keep up that pace. But what is it you're doing, right? So like we talked about, like too much, too little, right? For performance purposes, obviously, yeah, you want to push them above that 90%, right? And bring back into that safe threshold. But for a lot of times, people just go and they're just like, okay, well, I got a sweat, I broke a sweat, I run in, but are we really trying to get to somewhere? Is there an end goal, that you're trying to get to? And in this case, if you don't know what your numbers are or should be, then you're just pretty much going with, a blindfold.
This also apply to like weight training or like the heart rate.
Yeah. So your intensity, yeah, like heart rate, it's a little bit different, yes, because there's different factors, but mainly it's correlated. So your heart rate does increase. So check your heart rate when you first start your set, and check your heart rate at the end of your set, and look at that difference, right?
Yeah, and we used to say, you could never do any weight training to achieve this. And actually now we know that, so circuit training. So typically you're going to use lesser weight, more reps to get that heart rate up. Right. So, but yes, you can still use different modalities as long as they're large muscle groups. You can get your heart rate up into that range and you can sustain it. That's the key, is to sustain it. So we'll go through more of this on Thursday in terms of that. But as Diego says, this is really the key. If you master this, you got an income, right? Because this is what this is all about on here. So here's an example also. Anybody ever heard of this thing called METS, METS? Right? You may have been on an exercise machine, electronic one, and it came up with this thing, METS, or it might say watts. Like you'll see watts a lot. Watts is a measure of work. It's a workload, right? So the reason that we like METS, I'm a big Met fan, not the baseball team, but I'm a big Met fan. So here's why. So let's say Diego made a good point that, so now you've got a client. And I've got my client, and my client wants to, my client's heart rate is between X and X and Y. And now I know on a treadmill, that's going to be this speed and grade. But now I want to bring them to a bike, or now I want to bring them to an elliptical. I can use different pieces of equipment that provide a different load and have them work at the same level. So basically what METs do is, this is a multiple of your resting equivalent. So here's what this means. One MET is equal to 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So right now, as you sit in this classroom, you're at about 1 MET of activity. You're not exercising. Some of you might be digesting a little bit, but in other words, you're resting. Agreed? Mm-hmm. Right? So you're in a resting metabolism. So what the research says is that all of you are probably taking in 3.5 milliliters of oxygen for every 2.2 pounds of your body for every 60 seconds. Big person, small person, right? They're all taking that in. So this 7.7, this was a really hard picture to get yesterday. So I go on the internet, I'm looking for a, I Google, electronic exercise with I can't find anything. So I go down to the gym I normally work at, because I have a piece of equipment, but the little arm things go back. Man, that was I had to take like 8 pictures to try to get one that actually showed METs when it came up, because then it kept going away. Anyway, finally got it done. So basically, what this means is I was working at 7.7 times my resting metabolism. Well, if my resting metabolism is 3.5, I was working at 7.7 times that. So in essence, I was working at an oxygen consumption of about 26.95 mils per kg per minute. So don't worry about a lot of that. I just want you to get the concept that METs is multiples of resting. So if you're working at 10 METs, your client says, what's this thing METs? Oh, it just means how much harder are you working than when you're at rest? Right? I'm working 7 times harder. I'm working 10 times harder. When I work out, I usually try to get to about 10 METs. That gets me up to about 35 mils per kg. Right? So that's kind of what I try to do on there. And I measure my heart rate. And usually when I'm at about 10 METs, I'm usually at the high end of my training range. Okay, another one that we use is called the Borg Scale. Anybody ever heard of this? So this is for people that have difficulty in measuring their heart rate, or they're taking medication. Like if somebody is taking a beta blocker, we don't give them an exercise heart rate because the medication artificially suppresses their heart rate. They'll never be able to achieve it. So we can still prescribe exercise, and we do it based on this Borg scale. So take a look at this Borg scale. Why would something start at 60 or 6 and go to 20? Doesn't this seem like a weird scale? Like, I can't think of any other scale that doesn't start at 0 or 1. So this scale starts from 6 to 20. Any ideas? If you multiply each section by 10, it really goes from 60 to 200. That's about the range for a human being. Resting, maximum. Make sense? We're a pretty smart person here. So now we can judge exercise on that. If I were to ask all of you, you're exercising, and I were to say, take your heart rate, I would bet for the vast majority of you, if you measured your pulse at, say, 13, and I said, how does the exercise feel to you? You'd probably say, somewhat hard. In other words, your body, you're so in tune with your body that you understand what level of work you're at, right? In other words, a heart rate of 130, right? If I measured 13, that's really a heart rate of 130. 130, somewhat hard, not too bad, but somewhat hard. For some people, they are so disconnected from their body. We start them exercising, their heart rate might be, say, 90. How does this feel? Exhausting. Super hard. Like there's no clue. Right? They're really disassociated from their body. But for most people, this is a way they can judge the intensity, is by using this scale. What does it feel like when something is hard? So if I wanted, if that person's exercise prescription was 136 to 169, I would say, okay, we want you to work at a heart rate that's about, 13, or a feeling that's about 13 to 17, somewhere between somewhat hard and very hard. So we use their perception. So this is the Borg scale, our ratings of perceived exertion. How hard does this really feel to me? More than a walk in a park, less than running a marathon. Make sense? So I'm not using heart rate, I'm using how does this exercise feel to you? And this is one that I like to use a lot. This is the talk test. You ever use the talk test?
I used to. Not lately, but yeah, I have used it.
Yeah, I don't use it that much because I've been exercising by myself, so. So here's the talk test. The talk test, and this is again based on research, the talk test is a kind of an informal way to measure intensity. Here's two people running, right? Have you ever exercised with somebody and you have a conversation back and forth as you're exercising? Right? So the talk test says, if I can't have a conversation with my running partner, right? Because I'm too busy breathing, right? I can't bother to talk to you. I gotta breathe. I'm probably working a little too hard. I'm probably closer to that 90% of 60 to 90. The flip side of that is if you're just plugging away there, and the person's it's a monologue, right? Kind of what I'm doing now, right? It's not even a conversation. You probably got to pick it up a little bit, right? If you can tell them your whole life story, you've probably got to pick it up a little bit. Does that make sense? Right. So it's again, that reciprocal, give and take, so that you can do that. So we went over a whole bunch of ways that we can prescribe intensity, right? I could do it where if I actually had the equipment, I don't have to guess. I can directly measure it. Nice, but impractical, requires a lot of equipment. So we typically use heart rate or heart rate reserve. The one that we really like is this maximum heart rate reserve. This is called the Carbonine formula. We can also use non-heart rate methods, metabolic equivalent, that's the METs, ratings of perceived exertion, or talk test. These are all okay, but here's the meat of it right there. That heart rate reserve, fantastic. If you can help your client learn how to monitor their heart rate, understand what their high and low rates are, how to work within those, that's what we're going to cover on Thursday, is how do you work within that training intensity? Lots of different ways you can do it. But if you can pair that, where you can have your client and they can really understand that when my heart rate is 160 or 150 or whatever, I know what that feels like. And you've given them a big time gift, right? That's really, I don't do a lot of, I check my heart rate every now and again, but I'm so in tune with what kind of work I'm doing. And I have to say, as I've gotten older, the same heart rate that used to be my warm up is now my training. I gotta say, it feels harder. I mean, I'm like at a heart rate of 120. I'm like, good God, it's not hard. So, as we age, that training heart rate goes down, right? Because maximum heart rate goes down, right? So, like when I started training my father here, I mean, he was 80 years old. I still used 60 to 90%, but 60 to 90% of a much lower heart rate, right? Because he was 80. Right? So his maximum heart rate was like 140. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So on Thursday, what we're going to do is we're going to have you be working in groups on Thursday. So we're going to give you some scenarios. So different clients, you're going to figure out, we're going to go through some things called stage training, which is basically interval training. So we're going to look at some different ways that you can now play with this prescription. And then we're going to give you some examples, some case studies. And you and a partner are going to develop an exercise prescription for cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory endurance. And then we'll share with everybody about what we're coming up with. So we'll give you some good scenarios. Okay. Do you have a question, Todd?
No.
Excellent. All right. Well, that was a lot. And I would always say, don't be afraid of math. That's the only math. Addition, subtraction, division. Trust me, if I can do it, anybody can do it. All right, on that note, make sure everybody gets a high five or a thumbs up or some recognition that job well done, way to go. And then have a great rest of the day. By the way, don't let me forget, because I just realized I forgot it. Dividing by 6. You know what 10-second heart rates are? So just quickly. So if my training heart rate is 136 to 169, that's really hard to measure, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we just divide these by 6. And we take 10-second heart rates. So that's going to be somewhere probably about 21 to, what is that? So, so this might be like 24 to say 29. So for 10 seconds, if my heart rate's between 24 and 29, that's the same as 136 to 169. That makes sense? We'll go through that on Thursday. All right, on that note, have a great rest of the day. Enjoy.